What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 3 of top 14 favorite Fire Emblem bosses. You know the drill. Parts 1 and 2 are already up on my channel, so if you want to see numbers 14 to 7, I suggest you watch those two videos first, then come back to this video for the remaining 6. Alright, since we got that out of the way, let's get back into it. Moving on, number 6, we have Linus from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Alright, considering how Fire Emblem Blazing Sword is the first ever Fire Emblem game we in the West ever got, out of everything else, it kind of makes sense that we all have our different and favorite Fire Emblem bosses from that game. And of course, for me, I have to choose Linus from Chapter 24, or Four Fangs of Death. And naturally enough, this one's a little bit interesting since you only get this chapter if Lyn, Elo, and Hector's levels are equal 50 or higher. And that being said, yeah, the reason why I'm choosing Linus's over Lloyd's, because I played through Lloyd's version, and yeah, let's just say I struggled. That being said, I find Linus's much easier, as not only is it a little bit wider and easily spaced, but there's also a notable area. There's a notable place for the arena where you can train up some of your other units before you take on Linus. And naturally, Linus gives you a wide berth in order to get to him, in order for you to face off against, before he essentially goes over there to face off against you. And even with that, you eventually end up even getting Geitz as a recruitable unit, which, naturally to say the least, yeah, I prefer Geitz over Wallace because at least he can take a hit. And even with that, yeah, Linus is he's pretty tough, he's still able to be dealt with quite naturally. And even with that, eventually this leads you to Chapter 29, where you face off against Lloyd. And I prefer this version because at least you could be able to give Nino a few levels. That's all I gotta say. Moving on next at number 5, we have the Death Knight from Fire Emblem Three Houses. Granted, this isn't the first time you see the Death Knight, as you eventually come across him in Chapter 4, where you're basically facing off against the members of the Western Church, as you basically prevent them from putting together an assassination attempt on Lady Rhea's life. And considering how he's an optional boss there, yeah, you don't have to face off against him instantly. He just stands there menacingly. That being said, 2 chapters later, and eventually, Flame ends up getting kidnapped, and the Death Knight is basically the culprit. So, in following the clues to a small passageway leading to a catacombs under Garreg Mach, basically you find Flame and Monica, Reed Cronia, unconscious on the ground, and the Death Knight shows up, and he is ready to tussle. Granted, considering the amount of times I've played through Three Houses, I've noticed you can basically just attack him using an archer and just be done with it. However, that being said, where's the fun in that? So basically you split up your units into two different strike forces. One heading to the right in order to shut off the switch to basically turn off the traps, while the others head the long way around the left to where the Death Knight can be. And both groups can converge upon the same area in a matter of seconds. And naturally, it kind of fits perfectly here. And while you can basically face off against anyone, I think we all know the best unit. It has to be a little white-haired mage girl with the ability and penchant for dark magic that can turn the Death Knight into Swiss cheese. And yes, I'm talking about Lysithea. It's kind of obvious. Moving on next at number 4, we have Hardin from Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Okay. For those that remember from Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, Hardin was basically Mars' stalwart ally, basically given the name of the Coyote. And of course, naturally, you wouldn't expect him to be an enemy force in the near future. However, in New Mystery of the Emblem, apparently that happened, as basically Hardin and Princess Nina end up getting married. However, it would eventually result in a loveless marriage, since Nina basically still has feelings for a certain black armor-clad paladin who's now stuck in Valentia, who ended up in Valentia. And of course, Hardin, after feeling the lack of love from his marriage, ends up eventually feeling so hard up that he basically falls for Garneth's tricks and becomes corrupted as a result. This leads you into Fire Emblem, the main game of Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, and thus leads you to Chapter 20, where you finally end up facing off against Hardin. And he is at his toughest, besides the fact that he's holding Midia hostage. But of course, as a result, honestly, there's a reason why he's pretty hard to face off against. As he's holding the Shadow Spear, which basically nullifies all damage done against him. Meaning the only way you damage him is basically by a unit holding the Light Spear, as that can only work. And more often than not, he's no slouch in the offense department either, as he wields the legendary regalia, Gradivis. And yeah, that is gonna be hard to face off against him. Granted, more often than not, there are a few units to utilize it, but Mars basically tends to be the best idea. Naturally, due to him wielding the rapier, which allows him to deal bonus damage to armored units. Basically, if Marth's eating his Wheaties, basically you'll be able to take him down. Granted, that being said, if you kept certain units alive, you'd be able to move on to the game. But if certain units died, congratulations, you got the bad ending. It's kind of a turning point when it comes down to New Mystery of the Emblem. And it's one of the most surprising and stressful moments I've ever seen in my life. Moving on, next at number 3, we have Carlisle from Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Speaking of turning point bosses, Sacred Stones basically differs depending on which route you end up going through. As in Ephraim's pathway, he ends up heading to Grado to find out what's going on with Emperor Vigard, while Erica heads to Johanna to warn about Grado destroying their sacred stone. Of course, this leads to chapter 14 of Erica's route, where they're too late, as Kalak takes Queen Ismare hostage, and we learn that she was basically turned over to Grado by Carlisle, who did it because he has a thing for her. Jeez. Honestly, that being said, as Kalak takes Ismare to lead him to the Sacred Stone, Carlisle stays on the throne, where he basically faces off against you. So you have to fight through the entirety of Johanna Castle in order to reach Carlisle. And my god, he is tough. Naturally because of his wind sword. And if you had to have a sniper like Naomi or Inez, or basically better yet, have him face off against Joshua, yeah, you're gonna be in for quite the fight. Granted, it does give you a solid sword, so there's that. Yeah. Moving on next at number 2, we have Mustafa from Fire Emblem Awakening. Oh boy. Yeah. Fire Emblem Awakening had a lot of bosses that I could have considered the best. In fact, I didn't know which one I would choose. However, I had to go with Chapter 10. Namely, because of how the atmosphere changed, since it comes right after the events of Chapter 9 and Emerin sacrificing herself in order to keep the Fire Emblem safe. So by then, Chrom and the rest of the shepherds are more or less feeling the somber atmosphere of after everything that had happened, especially with the rain, before they end up getting cornered by Mustafa and his Plegian soldiers. And naturally, Mustafa doesn't want to fight anyone, however, thanks to Emerin's words. However, he's basically forced to fight Chrom and the rest of the shepherds because Gangrel will kill his family if he doesn't. So, basically, this is one of the more notable boss battles I ever think about, and you're fighting through a dismal and almost somber battlefield with many bits of skulls and skeletal debris in order to get to Mustafa, who's your first ever berserker, so he's a big boy. But the reason this is as high as it is because this is one of the most tragic boss battles. And if things had turned out different, then he would have been a solid ally to Chrom and the rest of the shepherds. Really makes you think. It really does. Finally, at number 1, we have Petrine from Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. Alright. For those that don't know, the Great Bridge is one of the more difficult chapters in Path of Radiance. And honestly, while Petrine adds to that, basically, I played through it before and I've attempted it so many times. And the reason why I put this high on the list is that it made me think for once. I mapped out the entire map of the Great Bridge in order to find a perfect way through to Petrine. And when I finally defeated her with Ike and Soren, it was one of the most satisfying moments ever. So, honestly, it's for that reason that I'm giving Patrine's boss battle number 1. As well as giving me the Flame Lance because, my god, that is a good weapon. Alright, so those are the top 14 favorite Fire Emblem bosses. Like, comment, and subscribe! I'll see you next time!